Hi, this is Bruce Wilson, and this is the first in a series of videos I'm producing about digital ethics. So if you're working with an organization that uses data, and most organizations, frankly, are using data now, one way or another, even if you don't see data as being an important part of your role, increasingly as time goes on, your ability to make decisions using data and to make decisions about how data is being used will be important. Organizations are discovering that they need to make a series of decisions about when to use data, who in an organization is responsible for making decisions about data and executing on those decisions. There are training issues, there are regulatory issues, there are issues about how to communicate with customers about data and how it's being used. How are customer privacy and security concerns being addressed? So this is becoming a part of the everyday vocabulary of anyone working for almost any organization. Digital ethics concerns a swathe of these decisions having to do with issues like privacy and security, concerning whether data is being used appropriately, both at an individual level and at an organizational level. So the first story is a happy story, a story about a financial services company in Europe that was losing a lot of customers to competitors. They spent a lot of money acquiring customers. They're very hopeful they're going to be able to have good, long, profitable relationships with these customers, and the customers leave. So they were able to develop a machine learning algorithm, artificial intelligence, to predict which customers were likely to turn over. And they were able to use this to change the way they messaged to customers who were deemed likely to turn over. And they were able to reduce customer turnover by 50%. So this is good in two ways. So this is better for the company's profitability. They spend the money they spend acquiring customers, in return they get customer revenue. And it's good for the customers because the customers clearly were dissatisfied and now they're satisfied. They're getting the right information from this company. So that's a big success story. So now let's talk about a story which you probably have heard about. You may not realize it's an ongoing saga. It's what they call Dieselgate. In 2015, the news broke that VW had been manipulating the emissions test results for its entire fleet of diesel cars. They did this to improve diesel sales because this enabled them to claim that their cars met emission standards that their cars were unable to meet. The way this worked was that the cars could detect when they were hooked up to emissions test equipment, and while they were hooked up, they automatically produced lower amounts of emissions than they were capable of producing while they were being driven. So a lot of different people in the organization were involved in this at various levels. It was essentially a company strategy, part of a global drive to increase diesel vehicle sales. But in the process, they manipulated data that really belonged to 11 million customers. Is this simply a technical issue? No, I think it's an ethical issue. For example, one of their engineers went to jail for 40 months for this. And the engineer was essentially, while part of a deception, was just following orders, right? The CEO of Volkswagen resigned 5 days after the scandal hit. The CEO's successor quit after that. Now, these guys couldn't be prosecuted in the U.S., but a couple employees who did come to the U.S. were arrested and prosecuted. The company is estimating that it will lose $32 billion for fines, settlements, recalls, and vehicle buybacks. There was a $66 billion drop in the stock market value of the company after this scandal broke. VW's sales decreased in the US. A shareholder lawsuit was filed in Germany seeking $10.4 billion in damages for fraud and stock manipulation. A subcontractor, an engineering subcontractor, was fined the maximum amount the regulatory agency thought it could pay, $35 million, without going bankrupt. And the German parliament passed a new law allowing collective lawsuits, similar to class action lawsuits like they have in the United States. And almost 400,000 vehicle owners joined this lawsuit between November and December 2018. So what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is that ethics is something that affects companies on a lot of different levels. If you're trying to bring more customer satisfaction, as well as profitability, data is a good way to do that sometimes. If you're trying to sell more vehicles and don't care so much about whether you're doing it legally or not, like Volkswagen was, ethics are going to get you in trouble. And you're going to see not only massive fines and stock market losses and people going to prison, but even new causes of action, new lawsuits, new types of lawsuits. So in this series of videos, we're going to talk about things like, what are ethics? This is not clearly defined for most of us. And there's a surprising amount of sophisticated disagreement about how digital ethics should be applied to business. What are the business potential gains and losses from ethics? And we just touched on that today. Who is responsible for digital ethics? And the Volkswagen example gives us a good example of how that is spread out through an organization. And finally, how do we communicate about digital ethics when we're talking to coworkers, when we're talking to leaders, employees, to customers, regulators, attorneys? These are all things that organizations need to discuss, and we're going to talk about these on this series of videos. So thank you for joining me. I hope to see you again.